Welcome to the fifth and final day of Harper McLeod's Marine Economy Week. If you have been tuning in over the course of this week, you will have made an online visit to one of Scotland's most technically advanced fishing trawlers, learned about a major economic regeneration project in Orkney, and discovered more about Scotland's two new green free ports and the impact they could have on the marine economy. Today, the focus is offshore renewables. My name is Omar Ali, a partner in Harper McLeod's renewable energy team. I am delighted to be joined by Paul O'Brien, a senior development manager at Deepwind. The Deepwind supply chain cluster is the largest offshore representative body in Europe, with more than 860 members, drawn from across industry, academia, and the public sector. The purpose of the cluster is to help its members achieve greater benefits from the current and future development of offshore wind in the UK and internationally. As an introduction, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the offshore wind industry. There's around 3 gigawatts of installed offshore wind in Scotland, with SSE's Seagreen offshore wind farm becoming fully operational in October this year, and which is now Scotland's largest offshore wind farm with a capacity of 1.1 gigawatts. In the pipeline, there are 20 Scotwind projects with seabed option agreements. The first 17 projects were announced in April last year. These were joined in October last year by a further 3 projects, which were granted agreements through a clearing process. The Scotwind projects will have a total capacity of 30 gigawatts. There was then the Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas Decarbonisation leasing round, the purpose of which was to develop offshore wind projects that either reduce emissions from the North Sea oil and gas infrastructure or consist of small-scale innovative projects of 100 megawatts or less, the results of which were announced in March this year, where 13 projects were offered exclusivity agreements with a potential of over 5 gigawatts of offshore capacity. Hopefully that provides you with some background information on offshore renewables, and I now welcome Paul. Paul, thanks for coming along. Glad to have you with us. What do you see as the key issues affecting the offshore wind industry in Scotland?
Key issues, yes. Well, Omar, thanks for inviting me along. Always a pleasure to take part. There are a number of key issues that have developed recently. And of course, coming from a supply chain organisation, we always come from that direction first. So our supply chain needs to really beef itself up if it's going to deliver the 30 gigawatts that's in Scotland and the 5.4 gigawatts that's in the INTOG round. So this is really looking at how do we assist, particularly the Scottish supply chain, to capture enough of this business to make it worthwhile investing in the first place. So one of the big issues is the companies have to invest to win the business. And we want to work with many of our members to ensure that they are ready for when the opportunities come along. And some of them we've mentioned are already coming along with 3 gigawatts delivered. But many people would say there's not very much Scottish content there. And we'd have to say, yes, that's true because of circumstances, but we want to be ready, particularly when floating wind comes along, because that we see as the global opportunity, and we really need to capture that. We cannot fail to capture the benefit of floating wind being in Scotland, the largest market in the world at the moment. Our pipeline is the largest in the world for floating wind. So the opportunity for the supply chain to grasp is enormous. And one of the issues is that we really need to set our stall out to win this business.
Okay. In your opinion, how can these issues be addressed so that Scotland can realise the huge potential of offshore wind?
As I said, the literally a huge pipeline. It's over 40 gigawatts. We need to make sure that often used word collaboration actually happens. So government, industry, academia need to be aligned in the what we call the triple helix. They all have to work together in tandem. And that's in infrastructure, it's in supply chain development, it's in innovation and research. we need to do all of that aimed at beefing up the Scottish economy to deliver this. Now, again, always coming back to the supply chain from our side, we need developers to recognise that we've had tough times, and we need to take steps to try and combat that. And one of those is with the supply chain on innovation. We see innovation as one of the steps to reduce cost. So cost reduction through innovation. That would be a key step. The developers, we would ask to look at investing in that innovation within the supply chain. It's usually SMEs that deliver the innovation. So it would be great if we had a methodology for those innovators within the supply chain to help the developers lower the cost, particularly now, lower the cost of the development of offshore wind. And that would be a key step in the right direction. Not the only one. There's a number of other things that have to happen in tandem. We also need to speed this up. It's taking far too long to deliver these projects. So government has a role in that. And when I say government, I mean UK and Scottish government in speeding this up. And we need to address some of the other barriers and factors. And Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council is one of the players that can help deliver the removal of some of those barriers. And that's what we're working towards at the moment.
And if we have a look at the fifth round of the contracts for difference, where there was about 5 gigawatts of potential contracts up for grabs, and yet not a single offshore wind development bid for any of the contracts for difference. So what does that tell us about the industry at the moment?
Yeah, well, it tells us, I think I mentioned earlier, we've had a tough year when we look back at what's happened. Geopolitics has intervened. We're seeing inflation rates. We're seeing borrowing rates have crept up more than 400%. So borrowing money to deliver projects has become difficult. And hence why industry are looking at the current contract for different strike prices and believing that they can no longer deliver viable projects for that price. So we've got a hiatus now. That means a delay to those potential 5 gigawatts of projects because we're not moving forward with the CFD on it. We need to sort this. Before we get to the next round of contracts for difference, we need government to come to the party. They need to realise that this continual, what has been a continual reduction in CFD pricing can't be sustainable now because of inflation, because of what was suffered with a war, Russia-Ukraine. We've now got possible issues in the Middle East at the minute, which if that flares up worse than it is at the moment, that could have even more dire consequences for inflation and costs. These are global problems. They're not just Scotland or the UK, but there are steps that we can take to try and alleviate some of the issues here. But the developers at the minute cannot deliver projects for the CFD strike prices that were on offer. So we need to look next time, and hopefully that we're not going to go beyond the next CFD round. We need to sort it in the meantime. So government really has to look at what can they do with the strike price that will enable the industry to move on again. And we're just facing so many issues in the supply chain. The turbine manufacturers are all complaining they can't make any money at the current pricing within the industry. So it's not just the developers that have issues about delivering the projects, it's the whole supply chain that are struggling to deliver for what is on the table at the minute. So everything has to move up a gear if we're going to deliver that 30 to 40 gigawatts in the current pipeline.
You mentioned floating wind, and floating wind represents over 60% of the Scotland projects, which means that Scotland has the most seabed dedicated to floating wind anywhere in the world. So how can Scotland take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?
And that is the challenge. As I said earlier, we've got a huge opportunity market here right on our doorstep in Scotland. We are gearing up to look at how we deliver, particularly the substructures, but also we've got vast experience from 50 years of oil and gas in mooring systems, anchoring systems, particularly looking at what's been done in the North Sea. So that energy transition experience has to cross over into floating wind. So we've got quite a big advantage compared to some of our competitors out there in the world. But we have to harness that, but we also have to capture new business in manufacturing the substructures. The two choices at the moment are concrete and steel. We're only looking at about 20% of up to 1,000 substructures needing to be delivered to get that 64% that you mentioned. So we need to up that concrete side of it. So we're trying to do that. If we can increase that, local content becomes easier to deliver because the construction industry is pretty strong in Scotland and the UK. And we are looking at the potential of a very high local content percentage if it's concrete. Now, the bulk of them are looking at steel. So we have to work on that as well. Our existing supply chain companies can deliver some of it, but we need to bring in inward investment to major companies of scale to help us deliver the substructures to manufacture them in Scotland in our ports. So we're already expanding our port capacity. You've mentioned the green free ports earlier, and that is a fantastic opportunity area for manufacturing for floating wind coming forward. So we're in a very strong position when we look at what we can do in the infrastructure side of it, but we really need to influence companies of scale to step into the market. And also to grow our existing companies of scale into this sector as well. The ambition is huge, but there are challenges that come with it. And this next 5 years is going to be critical to set up that floating wind supply chain. If we're successful, then we can actually export that knowledge and products and services overseas as well. So it's not just that pipeline of just over 20 gigawatts of floating wind. It's everywhere else that floating wind is going to make inroads. The whole of Southern Europe, west coast of the US, Japan, other areas of Asia, across the Mediterranean. There is a huge floating wind market out there, much bigger than fixed. If we get this right, well, literally, we can duplicate what we did in oil and gas over the last 50 years, where we're exporting a lot of know-how worldwide in the oil and gas sector. We can do the same in floating wind as well, if we get it right.
Paul, how can local communities benefit from the Scotwind and INTOG projects?
Yeah, that's a very important subject because for most people, that's what they're thinking. What's in this for me? You know, the people that you talk to across Scotland are interested in finding out what's the impact to them or to their families. So the big one is jobs in the local community. So whether that's at the green free ports or the other ports where they're looking at manufacturing, and we're talking literally thousands of jobs in the manufacturing sector for offshore wind, particularly floating wind. But what we're also seeing is the opportunity for regeneration in some of the smallest ports that we have. Ports such as Wick and Buckie in the north of Scotland are benefiting from the operation and maintenance side of offshore wind. And the beauty of this is that these are not project-based jobs. Well, they are, but they're very long-term. So operation and maintenance are for the lifetime of the project. So that could be a 20-year lifetime opportunity with jobs in the local community. And to make sure that they are in the local community, we are trying to make sure that the training necessary for that local jobs in the local community, that the training is delivered locally as well. So we're talking to the Scottish College Network and the universities to try and make sure that people, particularly where these operation and maintenance centres are, can get the training to become technicians or to work in the maritime sector on the vessels, so that that is right there. I literally walk to work, as they say in offshore wind, walk down to the harbour, get on the boat, go out, service the turbine, come back and go home at the end of the day. That is not how it's being delivered at the minute, with a lot of labour coming from elsewhere. So ideally, we would want all of those operation and maintenance jobs to be delivered as local as possible by local people. And it's a huge benefit to the community, particularly the smaller ones. And with the number of projects, you mentioned that there's 30 Scotwind and there's 13 Intog ones, and they are literally going to need operation and maintenance bases all over the whole of Scotland. So a lot of very small communities are going to benefit directly from the development of offshore wind in Scotland.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. I'd like to thank Paul for his contribution and hope you all got something out of it. It also brings our week of events to a close, and I would like to thank everyone who took part, and in particular, all our external speakers for their time and valuable insights. Thank you.